Exodus chapter 32, beginning at verse 1. When the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, the people gathered around Aaron and said to him, "Come, make gods for us, who shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him." Aaron said to them, "Take off the gold rings that are on the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me." So all the people took off the gold rings from their ears and brought them to Aaron. And he took the gold from them, formed it in a mold, and cast an image of a calf. And they said, "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt." And when Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it. And Aaron made proclamation and said, "Tomorrow shall be a festival to the Lord." They rose early the next day and offered burnt offerings and brought sacrifices of well-being. And the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to revel. The Lord said to Moses, "Go down at once. Your people, whom you brought up out of the land of Egypt, have acted perversely. They have been quick to turn aside from the way that I commanded them. They have cast for themselves an image of a calf, and have worshipped it and sacrificed to it, and said, 'These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt.' And the Lord said to Moses, 'I have seen this people, how stiff-necked they are. Now let me alone, so that my wrath may burn hot against them, and I may consume them. And of you I will bring and make a great nation.' But Moses implored the Lord his God and said, 'O Lord, why does your wrath burn hot against your people, whom you brought out of the land of Egypt with great power and with a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians say, it was with evil intent that he brought them out to kill them in the mountains and to consume them from the face of the earth? Turn from your fierce wrath, change your mind, and do not bring disaster on your people. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, your servants, how you swore to them by your own self, saying to them, 'I will multiply your descendants like the stars of heaven, and all this land that I have promised I will give to your descendants, and they shall inherit it forever.' And the Lord changed his mind about the disaster that he planned to bring on his people." An article in the Village Voice describes how some people suffer from brief periods of amnesia. Researchers are hard-pressed to explain this scientifically. These periods of amnesia do not seem to be associated with any particular region of the brain. A doctor from Johns Hopkins who studies this sees cases about once a month, said it usually is very transient and lasts less than a day. Several hours during which people don't remember what they said or what they did during that period. Generally, they never do remember what they are doing during that time period, she said. "I saw someone yesterday who decorated a Christmas tree very nicely, and later that day he came down and said, 'Who decorated the tree?' He couldn't remember doing it at all." I always thought that amnesia is for soap operas. Every soap opera has to have at least one amnesia case every couple years. The Reader's Digest had a story about a man by the name of Clive Waring. Clive Waring was a musician, composer, Renaissance music scholar. In March 1985, just 18 months after he got married, Clive was struck down with an extreme case of amnesia. The doctor said that Clive's amnesia was caused by a virus that traveled to his brain and wiped out his memory center. So now for Clive Waring, every waking moment is like waking up for the first time. Not only is his memory gone, but his ability to store new memories is also gone. His memory stores information for about 7 seconds. Any new information that is given to him just melts away. Clive's wife walks into the hospital room, and he springs to his feet and says, "You're gorgeous, I love you." He says the same thing every time she enters the room. Minutes later, she steps out into the hall, and he looks around worriedly. "Someone told me my wife is here, but I haven't seen her. I haven't seen another human being in 20 years, he says. Can you imagine to live with no memory? To live with no memory is really to live with no hope. Memory and hope are tied together. We remember, and so we hope. And hope without any kind of memory is just wishful thinking, baseless optimism. It doesn't have any roots. It doesn't have any basis in what you know and in what you've experienced for yourself. One of the things we notice when we read the story of the Exodus is how prone the children of Israel are to a kind of amnesia, how quickly they forget. They have a poor collective memory. They come to the Red Sea and they panic. They forget all that God has done to free them from slavery. They find themselves in the wilderness with no food, and immediately the novelty of freedom wears off. They become nostalgic for Egypt, where they had everything they needed. And now here in chapter 32, they make an idol to worship in place of God, forgetting that God had fed them with manna and quail and quenched their thirst with water from a rock, forgetting all the ways that God had provided for them. Moses had gone up on Mount Sinai to meet with God and receive the 10 Commandments. He had been gone a while, 6 weeks, and the people were impatient and began to worry. Did Moses die? Did he go back to Egypt by himself? Was he ever coming back? And perhaps they began to wonder if God had deserted them too. So they came to Moses' brother Aaron and demanded that he make for them gods that can lead them. And Aaron does what they ask. He makes for them a golden calf. And if you haven't read the story in the Bible, then you have seen Cecil B. DeMille's film with Charlton Heston as Moses, and the scene where the wayward Israelites are dancing around the golden calf like crazed lunatics. And it's pretty easy for us to read this story and to wonder, what is wrong with these people? How could they do something like that? But put yourself in their shoes for a moment. It has been a long 3 months since they walked out of Egypt. They are somewhere down in the Sinai Peninsula, where food and water are scarce. And now Moses has gone up on the mountain to be with God. 6 weeks he has been gone, and they begin to wonder if he's ever coming back. And in a way, Moses represented God for the children of Israel. Whenever the people hear a word from God, it is always through Moses. So it is not just that the people miss their leader, they must have felt like they had lost their connection to God. Maybe they began to feel that God had abandoned them as well. They are feeling abandoned out in the hot, barren desert for a long time without any word from God. They feel lost and alone, and that is enough to make them do something desperate. What are we going to do? Can you imagine the discussions and the meetings and the committees they had? What shall we do? I've got an idea. Let's make an idol. When you start wondering if God has forgotten about you, it is tempting to look for something a little more tangible in a god. And so the Israelites said to Aaron, "Make us a god that we can see before us. As for Moses, we do not know what has become of him." In other words, make us a god that we can get our hands on when we really need him. Notice here that as many people observe, that when people get scared or anxious, they often get religious. When we face trouble that we can't handle ourselves, we go looking for God. Do you remember a movie that starred Burt Reynolds? It was entitled The End. In the film, the Burt Reynolds character decides to commit suicide by swimming out as far out into the ocean as he can until he's exhausted and then just go under. But after going under, he is looking at the surface from the underside, and he decides not to go through with it. He's having second thoughts, and as he breaks through the surface of the water, he screams, "I want to live! I want to live!" He then begins to try to swim to shore, but it is a very long way off. And so as he begins to swim, he talks to God. He wants to negotiate a deal with God. He promises to obey all of the 10 Commandments, and then realizes he doesn't know what all of them are, so he promises that he'll learn all of the 10 Commandments. Then in his panic, he says, "Lord, if you get me out of this trouble, I will give you 80% of everything that I own." The time passes, and he's still going strong, and besides, he can just begin to see the shoreline. But as he continues to swim, he feels his strength holding out and says, "Lord, if you help me get to shore alive, I will give you 10% of all my earnings." And finally, as he struggles to the place where he sees that he's just going to be able to make it to land, he says, "Well, Lord, let's just forget about what I said before. I think I can make it from here on my own." Often when people get anxious about their lives, they get religious. And we look for solutions to our problems from God. Some people call it jailhouse religion. And then what happens is that when God doesn't give us what we want and provide for us a quick fix to our problems, then we look for other gods that we can control. When people are discouraged with the true God, they always search for other gods. G.K. Chesterton said that when people stop worshiping God, they don't worship nothing. They worship everything and anything. Maybe what I need is a new job, or a new house, a new body, or a new spouse. Something that will make me happy again. That will be something I can get my hands on and will make me satisfied. That will solve all of my problems. Whatever you are counting on to get you out of the desert into the promised land, quickly and easily becomes an idol. Maybe the best thing about worshiping the golden calf is that a golden calf doesn't make any demands of you. It doesn't have 10 commandments that you're required to obey. It doesn't expect you to believe in it even when it doesn't do what you want. It doesn't even demand exclusive loyalty. That is one of the nice things about worshiping a golden calf. If the golden calf doesn't do it for you, try the golden cat, or the golden watch, or the golden medal, or the golden parachute. The golden calf doesn't care how many other gods you try. The golden calf is so agreeable. Whereas the Lord is not so agreeable. In fact, God is the opposite of the golden calf or any other idol that you and I could create. God is unmanageable. God is demanding. God will not be controlled by human hands. God will not come every time you whistle or ring a bell. The book of Genesis says that God created human beings in his own image. And as some have noted, ever since, human beings have been creating God in their own image. We have tried so hard to domesticate God, to make him reasonable and manageable. Barbara Brown Taylor puts it like this: many feel betrayed by a God whom they believe to have broken an implicit promise. According to their Sunday school teachers, God made a bargain with each one of them. Do what I say, and I will take care of you. So they did, and for years it seemed to work. They obeyed their parents, their teachers, their coaches, and they were taken care of. But one day the system failed. They did everything right, and everything went wrong. Their prayers went unanswered. Their belief went unrewarded. Their God went AWOL. Then she says this: for those willing to keep heaving themselves toward the light, things can change as we turn away from the God who is supposed to be in order to seek the God who is. Every letdown becomes a lesson and a lure. Did God fail to come when I called? Then perhaps God is not a minion. Did God fail to punish my adversary? Then perhaps God is not a policeman. Did God fail to make everything turn out all right? Then perhaps God is not a fixer. Every time God fails to meet our expectations, another idol is exposed. Every time God lets us down, we have another opportunity to draw nearer to the living God beyond these idols. Maybe the story of the golden calf is a warning. Anytime you find that your God comes in a box with the phrase, "some assembly required," you know that it is a bad deal, and it's not going to work. We, like the Israelites, may be all too willing to trade in the freedom in serving God for being a servant to something that we assemble, that we think will get us to the promised land, get us what we want quickly and easily. The job, the house, the promotion, the relationship, the thing that will make us happy. And it will be something that we can get our hands on, and we will finally be satisfied with our lives. There is a story about an eagle that was flying in the sky, and he looked down and he saw a little man pushing a little cart. And on the cart there was a sign with the words, "Worms for sale." So the eagle landed and asked how much he wanted for the worms. And the man said, "A feather for a worm." That sounded like a pretty good deal to the eagle. He had a lot of feathers, so he gave the man a feather, and the man gave him a worm, and the eagle ate the worm and then flew off. The next day the man was back pushing his cart, and so the eagle went down. This was easy, traded another feather for a worm. The next day the same thing happened, and the next, and the next. Over time, the eagle found that he couldn't fly as high as he once could, or as far, but now he was becoming dependent on the worms. Every day he traded another feather for another worm. Finally, the day came when the eagle plucked a feather, gave it to the man, ate his worm, and tried to fly away. But he couldn't. He had given away too many feathers. So the eagle thought of a solution. He worked really hard and dug up a big pile of worms, took them to the man and asked for his feathers back. But the man said to him, "I trade worms for feathers, not feathers for worms. That's not the way the world works." God has given us this great gift of living in freedom, not fear, the freedom to mount up like eagles and soar. So don't trade your freedom. It's always a bad deal.